Thank you for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. Here at Business Legends, we don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Leddin, and you're listening to Disruption Lab. Hello and welcome to the Disruption Lab podcast. My name is Patrick Leddin, and today we're going to explore the high-pressure, high-speed world of professional motorsport. My guest today is Phiroze Bilimoria. He's a highly accomplished GT and sports car driver who knows what it really takes to perform at the very high level, where every decision counts, and it can be the difference between an accident, just walking away empty-handed, or even success and carrying the trophy off the track, if you will. We're going to talk about handling stress, delivering results, and working as a team when disruption is not the exception, it's the norm. So with that said, Phiroze, welcome to the Disruption Lab.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you. Hey, let's just jump right into it. How did you get involved in driving fast and racing with others?
So I grew up in Bombay or Mumbai, India, and I learned to drive on Bombay roads when I was about 8 years old. And they always say, if you can drive there, it's like any racetrack, just a lot slower because of the traffic. So I always had this passion for cars. And then when I moved to the UK, I got myself into karting, and from there kind of was successful in that, and then moved into racing in cars to beg, borrow, steal, work on sponsorship to progress from there, really.
It's a kind of a crazy world, right? I mean, what do people say when you're like, yeah, I race cars?
Yeah, most people kind of ask you, oh, is it Formula One? That's usually the first question.
Oh, sure.
But if they're familiar with motorsport, they typically want to know in what categories. And this type of racing that I do is generally, as you alluded to earlier, is kind of GTs, endurance racing, touring cars. So it's very much kind of closed wheel racing rather than open wheel single seaters.
Yeah. So how would you describe that for the novice out there? The listeners, like, I don't know exactly what that means. Like, okay, how fast are you going? How many cars? You talked about different classes. I mean, what's that looking like? Just give us kind of the basic, the bare bones.
Sure. So the cars can vary. So I've raced over the years, everything from Porsches to Aston Martin, Dodge Vipers, McLarens, a whole range of different vehicles. Races are anything from sprint races, which might be 30 minutes, to 12, 24-hour races, a little bit like Le Mans, Daytona 24 hours. So it's a mix of times. If you're doing the endurance races, you'll probably have 2 or 3 teammates, and you swap over what's called a stint. Different series have different regulations. It typically goes to based on how long the tires will last, how long fuel will last. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it rather than, right, okay, we're just going to split it equally. There's a lot of thinking and planning that goes into it.
Do you have a particular distance, or I guess about a time that you prefer? Like if it's like if there were 3 options on the calendar, is there one that would kind of you'd lean toward?
Not particularly. You kind of just go with based on the car you're in, the conditions, the teammates, because you have to work as a team. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you're working with other drivers, so sometimes you might be racing with somebody who maybe not as accomplished or not as quick in the dark, for example. So you'll look to put your quickest driver in at certain times, or you might start a driver at a particular point, or you look at what types of stints you need to do and where you're going to gain or lose. So it's a team effort. It's very much about looking at the strategy. And then I race at the other end of the spectrum as well. So just some more fun club level racing, which I do with my son sometimes, and we'll rock up at the circuit with the car. We'll run and prep it ourselves. We'll work on the car and in the car. So
Oh, that's awesome.
it's
That's
good
awesome.
fun.
Yeah, how long have you been working with your son on these?
Oh, my kids have been coming to the races since they were, well, actually, my daughter attended her first race when she was 4 weeks old.
Wow.
So, yeah, my son, he has a real interest, but much more on the mechanical side rather than the driving side. So yeah, he's been coming with me for a few years now.
That's awesome. Well, I would imagine that there's a lot of things that I know when I listen to you talk about racing, there's a lot of things that kind of go through my mind. Obviously, the speed of it all, the successes, the risk that comes with it, but also just that need to make a decision kind of in fractions of a second. How do you kind of manage your mind and your emotions when that pressure is so high?
I think, when you look at anything that you do uh, well, it doesn't just happen overnight, where you've spent countless hours testing, practicing, honing your craft. It then kind of forms muscle memory.
Hmm.
So you have a lot more capacity than you would imagine when you're actually out in the car. It's like when you first learned to drive. I don't know if you drive what you Yanks would call a stick shift, but the first time you press the clutch and have to change gear and you have to think, when do I match the revs? When do I accelerate? When do I brake? All of that's going through your head. If you then asked the person to think about other things, other cars, there's an awful lot going on.
Yeah.
Now it just becomes second nature. And it's kind of the same thing when you're racing, especially where you're at tracks that or cars that really well. It becomes almost automatic behavior, which then leaves you some mental capacity to then focus on things like the preparation, the strategy, the planning that goes into it that then allows you to make those split-second decisions.
Do you feel like in those decisions in the moment, there's almost a natural flow of it? Like you're so
Yeah,
used to doing it, you have so much muscle memory.
you do have a lot of muscle memory. And you make these decisions really quickly because you're doing things that are a lot further in advance. So if you're in the middle of a race, for example, and it's not an endurance race, or at any point where you're dicing with someone else,
Mhm.
you're kind of thinking 2 or 3 corners up the road rather than what's the next corner, because you might have to set up that individual to make a mistake or to think, where am I going to pass him? So you're making those decisions in the moment, but it becomes muscle memory when you're doing it consistently. And so it doesn't become as stressful. It becomes perhaps somewhat stressful when you then have to add in things like, oh, okay, I've heard a noise and there might be a problem with the car. So actually, then I'm now starting to think about things that, do I need to, back off at a certain point? Do
Mhm.
I need to serve it? Might be an endurance race. Do I need to make sure I can get to the next stint or the next stop, or do I need to make an immediate pit stop now because the wheel's about to fall off? And
Yeah. And I would imagine while you're thinking two or three turns ahead, the other person's doing it too, right? So you could have all
exactly.
the plans going on in your mind, but there's also the constant rejiggering of the plan
Yeah,
as it's unfolding.
absolutely. When you're competing at that, to be honest, at any level, you're always thinking about things that are happening up the road, but also what's happening behind you. So with endurance racing, you have multi classes. So you'll have cars of lots of different performance. So if you look at something like the Le Mans 24 Hours, you've got cars that are in the hyperclass, in LMP2, in GT Pro, and GTM. So they've all got different performances. And so you might be lapping cars within, if you're in the top category, for example, you might be lapping the cars within the first 30 minutes. And then the lapping cars have to then also make sure they don't get in the way. So you have a lot of things to think about ahead of you as well as behind you and around you.
That just sounds, I mean, it just sounds like, chaos. I mean, with cars coming up behind you, coming around you, I've run like marathons or things like that, but at least the pack kind of separates pretty quickly. You're not usually lapping through each other 5 or 10 times. So this just, but I can imagine those in like jogging like that or running like that. There's a lot of, people jockeying for position. But when you think about, oh, and the faster runner is going to come behind you 5 different times through this race and you're going to be, I mean, that's a lot.
It is, especially at night when you have no idea
Who it
all your
is.
two lights. And But there are lots of different ways. You've got your crew on the on the radio as well, if you're in the dark, or at any time really, that are there to help you.
So let me ask you this. So I can understand like you don't just show up one day and start racing, right? You're building on it over the course of time. And with that, you start to hone your abilities to manage stress in the moment and make decisions. I think that was a great example of like learning how to drive a stick, or we would say a standard as well. But what about like leading up to it? I'm not in the moment, but I'm leading up to the race. People listening to this podcast may not be stepping into the driver's seat for a race, but they may be stepping up to give the presentation or ask their boss for something or go talk to a customer. I mean, how do you kind of like manage that stress as you're leading up to the performance?
I think for me personally, it's a couple of things. One, it's about the preparation, right? The old saying, if you know, fail to plan, plan to fail.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's about really preparing mentally for what you're going to embark upon. But then there's also an element of visualization. So it's really visualizing yourself in that role in the race. I'll quite often I'll close my eyes and I'll do a whole lap of the circuit of every gear that I'm going to go in, every gear change, where I'm going to brake, and you can drive that lap in your head. And I think, it's the same with, I'm sure, all professional people. If you're about to go and do a presentation, you don't just open the deck 5 minutes before the
Yeah.
presentation and on stage and hope for it to be, a great result. I think it's the combination of the two. You have to believe you can do this, believe that you're going to be successful at it, because there's no space for doubt.
Hmm.
Because in a fraction of a second, if you hesitate, the results can be catastrophic. If you decide, I'm going to brake, and then you don't brake, or actually, I'm going to brake a little bit early, and the next person that's behind you, because bearing in mind, when you are racing, it could be that you could probably get a business card between the two cars. That's how close it can be. So if you decide you're going to do something erratic or unexpected, the result can be, uh, kind of catastrophic. So you have to prepare. You have to think, okay, at each of these situations, how do I plan? How do I prepare for it? So preparation is absolutely key for it all.
Yeah, you mentioned results a couple of times there. Just you're in a world that you're kind of setting yourself up for people to see the results, right? It's all about many times it's often about the results. Obviously, surviving and being healthy and taking care of yourself is really paramount. But also those scores go up or those times go up, and they're shared around the world these days. I mean, how do you personally deal with that like very public kind of results? Because I'm sure there's sometimes you don't deliver what you'd hope to deliver, but now everybody kind of sees it. I mean, how do you handle that?
I think sometimes there's a great saying which I love, which is that the bird that sits on the branch is not worried about the strength of the branch because it's confident in the capability of its own wings.
Hmm.
Right. So
Mhm.
in the same way, right, we're all going to have branches that fall and break. And if you have confidence in your own capability, you kind of don't need to answer to anyone else.
Yeah.
Um, you have to, if you have that mindset and combined with okay, how can I get better? How can I improve? What's going to be, the way I'm going to take the next step? And, when we talk about continuous improvement, as a driver, as a team, you're always reviewing everything, whether it's telemetry or adjusting setups, you're looking at tire pressures, you're looking at every last nth degree. And I think in business, it's no different, right? You review your performance metrics, you look at your refined processes, you look at how can you actually get better. And so, because all of that's public as well, right?
Yeah, it's true.
You might think it may not be on social media or in the news, but it's public to the people, it's public to the employees in the organization. Right? So in that sense, actually, you're all a team. And if you have that mindset of just how do we get better, you don't win or lose as a driver, you win or lose as a team.
I love that. It's interesting. There's certain sports or activities people do that we sometimes don't realize how much of a team sport they are. I remember He's had a fall from grace, but Lance Armstrong, the cyclist, I remember reading some of his early books, or his early book, and just realizing, gosh, how much teamwork goes into a sport like that. He might be the one in the seat, if you will, just like you're the one in the seat, but there's a team of people behind you. And how do you how do you kind of collaborate, work together, create that strategy? I mean, can you take us a little bit into that conversation when you know we're going to step up and do something that's high stakes here? We get one shot at this. How do we work together as a team to kind of create our plan?
I think there's a couple of things. I think it's about relationship and trust. You have to trust your team and they have to trust you. So you've got to build that rapport. Um, there are lots of people, I think, in that position where you can end up becoming excuse the term, prima donna.
Hmm.
You rock up and is everything ready? Doesn't tend to have as good a result as those that are there working with the team. Actually, it's well documented. You look at the most successful F1 drivers, from Michael Schumacher to Lewis Hamilton, they're there working with the team. They build a rapport, a relationship with the team. So from my perspective, it is a team sport. You go out and have beers with the team. You're looking at coming up with a plan and saying, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is what we're trying to do. What needs to happen? Who's doing what? And so, like I said, you win and lose as a team. You'll see just as much excitement. If you ever watch the finish of a race with the crew that's hanging over the pit wall,
Hmm.
cheering, it's a win for them just as much. And at different levels, when you find it even at some of the perhaps more grassroots level, actually inter-team uh, camaraderie is there. If something breaks on your car and you don't have the parts, countless times I've had other teams just dive in and they just want to help and get it fixed, and so they get you out there.
That's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about. I mean, motorsport itself is a great community, and it's a very small world as well. So, it's about treating people well and leaving them with a great feeling. And if you can do that with your team, they'll do that back in spades for you.
When you mentioned there that sometimes if you have a problem with a part and somebody else helps you sometimes in your experiences over the years, got me thinking, there's probably a lot of times where you've had to make pivots, like in a weekend or whatever it might be. You thought you were going to do this, you're going to race that, and all of a sudden it changed to this or this car and it became that car or whatever. Can you think of a time where you had that kind of like, yeah, when I think back, this is the one where like we had to make this massive pivot and here's what we learned from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was not so long ago. In fact, actually, I think it was earlier this year, we had a race. I was racing at Silverstone. I'd qualified in qualifying. So for those that don't know, qualifying is when you go out and you set your time
Mhm.
to determine where you're going to start the race, basically, and effectively the quickest time and starts the race in pole position, and you work your way down. And I think I was something like second or third, because I developed a problem, which again we talked about earlier. We could hear a noise, and I'd heard this noise, which was really disconcerting because the last time I heard that noise, some wheel studs had sheared off because of heat,
Oh,
and I
wow.
needed my wheel. And but I was still putting in really quick lap time, so I wasn't quite sure how we were managing this. Anyway, we came into qualify into at the end of qualifying into Parc Ferme, where all the cars are kind of contained till the officials will release them. I couldn't understand what was going on and realized that actually, again, it happened. My wheel studs had sheared off. So this is what effectively holds the wheel off.
Yeah, you kind of want that. Yeah.
And the noise that I was hearing was that the whole wheel was coming loose. And we didn't have any spare wheel studs. And you needed a certain size and a certain depth, etc.
Sure.
So there's lots of other race series that were going on. So it was very much a case of trawling the paddock with my cap in hand, and sending off different members of the team. In fact, not even members of the team, because this was one where it was my son, myself, and my daughter was there. And so we were all just kind of scattered across the paddock, asking race teams for whether they had wheel studs, and actually another race team had some studs, and another team came and helped because we had a very short window. We had like an hour to get it all fixed. And in fact, one of my competitors' team actually came, three, four of them, we all jumped on the car, we got it fixed. We started the race, took the lead and won the race. So it was in fact beat the team that helped me. So but it was still a great result. So yeah, you do have to just adjust and work with what you've got, but still believe you can do it.
Yeah, I love that sense of camaraderie. I mean, I know it's a sport and you're competing against each other, but at the end of the day, there's certain things you can do in life, and I can go back myself. I spent time in the military. There's certainly a when I bump into people who have had similar experiences, immediately there's that connection. I grew up playing a lot of music. Same thing there. If I bump into people who have been kind of in the same scene or same kind of world, you get it. I mean, I would imagine that's in racing as well. When you bump into somebody, it doesn't take but a couple degrees of conversation to realize you know so and so, or you've been such and such a place or whatever. And there's something really beautiful, I think, about those moments.
Yeah, and I think you'll see it in anything, right? Anywhere where you have a common passion,
Yeah.
it comes out, right? Whether it's sport, whether it's music, whether it's film, when you've got a common passion that you can share, that's what gets people together. And you're absolutely right. I was on a call this morning with a potential sponsor for next year, and he does a little bit of racing himself. And we got chatting, and I've never spoken to the gentleman before, and turns out we knew some people in common who, and it's that whole idea, right? We're only 6 degrees of separation away from anyone. And in motorsport, it tends to be a little bit smaller than 6 degrees.
Yeah, there's only so many people willing to do what you're doing.
It's more than you think, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I run into them occasionally out there on the interstate just driving to work or something. The people with that desire. As you were talking about earlier, Feroz, about the idea of like hearing something in your car and knowing it's not right. I would imagine, this is a podcast on disruption, and people are dealing with disruptions in their lives, and maybe even some of them need to put themselves in the seat of causing some disruptions because maybe they hear something that's not right and they're not acting on it. Can you think of like, imagine if somebody listening to this podcast right now, they're going like, I heard something in the team meeting. I know it's not right. I heard something, in a piece of equipment on the manufacturing floor, and no, it's not right. What would you be your words of encouragement or thought about going, you know what? You probably need to take action on that thing.
I think you just answered it, Patrick, right? Because often when you think something's likely not quite right, it usually isn't. And you can ignore it. You can pull the blanket over your eyes and do whatever else and hope it'll go away.
Mm.
But more often than not, if you're good at what you do, there's a reason you have that feeling. And so therefore it's going to come back. So you can either choose to plan and get ahead of it and prepare and have a strategy and think, great, okay, if it does go, what are my options? Right. And in my view, take the case I was talking about with the broken wheel stud. I could tell I had 4 minutes left maybe for the rest of the qualifying session. I'd already put in a pretty good lap time. My decision was to just finish the lap I was on and come in, because was it worth the risk of trying to beat the time when I know there's a problem with the car, to then try and do 2 more laps to just in the possible hope? No, it made absolutely no sense, because the risk of it going wrong could have been dreadful. I had to come in and address it,
Yeah.
and we addressed it. It gave me that little bit longer to go and find the problem. And then, if I hadn't addressed it and I thought, yeah, no, maybe hopefully that noise will go away.
Mm.
I know that I've taken the start, a lap into the start, I'd have found myself driving a three-wheel car into the wall. So in answer, I think you answered the question. You've got to address it.
Do you find that there's other things like, I mean, we just kind of pulled that one out from the conversation about when you hear something and you need to address it, it gives you a chance. Like I loved how you said to plan and come up with options. Do you find that there's other things that translate from the motorsport experience to work, to family, that have been kind of lessons that you've learned along the way?
Oh, completely. I think there's all sorts, whether you're talking about, like risk management. you were always pushing the limits, trying to avoid making mistakes, right? And I think you find that in business, if you're trying to grow your business, you're trying to develop, you've got to learn, but you've got to fail fast,
Mm,
right?
right.
You've got to try it. And I just read an article this week actually about the CEO of Adidas. Adidas was a business that was failing miserably, and he's turned it around in under a year by taking out layers and layers of bureaucracy and decision making, devolved decision making, gave people the ability to make those decisions and actually try things and fail fast and completely turned around. I think you learn these things. I think high performance on track, high performance in business, it's no different. And I think the same thing at home, right? You've got to give people, you've got to give one, you've got to make time for things that are important. You can't just skip over it and hope it'll go away. So same thing, you've got to plan, you've got to prepare, you've got to make time. If you're passionate about something, you've got to give it that attention. So yeah, I think there's so many things, and we could probably talk about that for hours.
Yeah, well, and as you said, like these things, like if you hear it or you see it or whatever, it doesn't usually get better. And actually, you can pay a pretty big price if your wheel comes off in your marriage or in your your personal or professional relationships or on the project or whatever it is. That I think all people can see that moment where you feel like the wheel just came off.
Yeah. So you have to have a level of resiliency and recovery, right? Because things will always go on, right? That's guaranteed. It's never going to go plain sailing. And so, it doesn't end there. And that's that point that I was making earlier about you visualizing
Hmm.
whatever turns you have to take to get back on track. No pun intended. But you've got to have that belief that that's where you will end up. I remember many years ago someone said, if you believe you can, you can't, you're absolutely right. So
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
so having that, and I try and say that to my kids. You've got to have a level of discipline and consistency, because I think it's the same thing in business, right? Discipline, consistency, and grit will beat the next new fad every day of the week. It'll beat the hot shot. If you're disciplined, if you're consistent and you work hard, that will pay dividends every single time.
Yeah, I would imagine, not to name names particularly, but I bet you've seen people who are just extremely talented. I mean, they're really talented in whatever role they have, whether they're, in the pit working on something on the vehicle or actually driving the vehicle or whatever it might be, and they weren't consistent. They didn't kind of stick to it, and you flame out, unfortunately. And you probably see that across your career, but also in some of these long races. You see it
Yeah,
just as you go into the race. Boy, that person looks like the hot shot. They're going to win this thing, and they don't.
you need that level of mental endurance, right?
Hmm.
And just sheer dogged determination. Like there's a reason why the profession is very slim, right? You don't see racing drivers at every street corner. Uh, it's because it does require a lot of work, and there are a lot of talented people, talented drivers that haven't made it. Probably far more talented than myself, uh, because you've got to work really hard. You've got to go and find the opportunities. They're not going to come to you,
Mm.
right? That's the other thing. You have to. Motorsport is one of those things. It's extremely difficult to get into. It's really tough because, unlike most other sports or music, if you wanted to play the guitar, you can pick up a guitar and go and play it. If you wanted to play football, you can go and get football and kick it around the park or go and play with some friends. If you want to go and race a car, that requires a level of investment and financial backing to even just get you out for the first time on a track, which makes it really difficult because it is often seen as an elitist sport.
Mm.
I know there's lots of initiatives to try and bring that more to you know people that don't necessarily have that financial. But the reality is, it still has to be paid for from somewhere.
Yeah.
So then you have to think about how do you make it commercially viable for entities or corporates or you know to get involved. And it goes back to a great work around thinking about what's the end in mind, right? Why would they want to get what's the outcome they're looking for? And then how do you tailor that solution to meet that need? And that's essentially what you have to do. That's why it requires that level of mental toughness. That's what I was talking
Well, if somebody's listening to this right now and they're picking up some things about that are applicable in their world, as we talk about how you deal with change and disruption and being resilient, but also they're just like, oh, motorsport sounds kind of interesting. What would you tell them to like, how do you even, where do you go to start kind of checking it out and learning a little bit about the activity?
define what you call interesting. If they're interested in becoming a sponsor, you can give them my number.
Okay,
But,
yeah, sponsors, yeah, I'll make sure, just get a hold of me. I'll give
I'm
you
joking.
the,
But you know what? It depends. Most places will have your local kart circuit, so that's a great way to start. Want to go and probably the most cost effective way. That's where I would start. Go karting, and it's great fun. I still do it now for fun. If you had you were financially more stable and decided you wanted to go into circuit racing, then most race circuits will have some form of race school or experience center that you can go and drive on a track and get a feel for it. But the key, I would always say, often people will think, oh, I know, I'm going to go and get a fast car and I'm going to improve the car and I'm going to put a bigger engine and put bigger brakes. I'm going to go and do a track day. My response will always be that the most important component, the nut behind the wheel. So it doesn't really matter how fast the car is. It doesn't do anything unless you put some inputs into it. So actually spend time on yourself, and you can just get a basic car and just go and learn a technique, learn how to drive the car, and then start to improve the vehicle. So you sort of going in parallel. Because if you just go in a quick car, to be honest, the car will drive you. This is what I was referring to earlier when I said I do a lot of driver coaching for drivers, and there are those that just want to go quick and they're not really interested in learning, and generally then you're trying to do car to scenery prevention.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then there are those that actually really want to learn and will take the time to understand the physics behind driving quickly, because most of it's physics. Most of it is about what goes on up here, and it's about 10% that goes to applying that. Once you get that, you can start to go quicker, much
Now that's something that's so true in life across the board, right? It's what's going on between our ears sometimes that talks us out of what we think we can't do or whatever it might be. Thanks for talking to this nut behind the mic. You mentioned a nut behind the wheel. I guess I was a nut behind the mic, but thanks so much for chatting with us today, Phiroze. It's really interesting to hear you kind of peel the curtain back on the realities of what it means to compete and win, but also about how applicable so much of it is to our life's work ourselves, whatever it is we're looking to pursue. It takes the ability to go, okay, I'm going to deal with some change here. I've got to have a bit of a strategy. I need to not ignore things when they pop up, because if I address them sooner, that gives me some options to handle them. I mean, so many of these things are applicable, and I bet you that's what's been helpful to you both in the driver's seat of your racing career, but your driver's seat of just your career overall. Thanks so much for joining us today. I wish you all the best. And for those listening today, if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about racing, I'll put a link to Phiroze information so you can kind of follow him and see how he's doing. I'm Dr. Patrick Leddin. Go make it a great day.